everyone, we're here today with another episode for MysticU, the Mystic University, and today it's my great pleasure to sit with and interview both Krista Schwimmer and Michael Wamback. They are phenomenal psychic, intuitive, tarot readers, amongst other things, and they are part of our team here at Mystic Journey Bookstore. A little bit about each of them separately, and then I'm going to tell you about their exciting history together. Dun, dun, dun. So, Krista.
Yes.
Gosh, you both have extraordinary backgrounds. Kabbalistic Tarot, palmistry, animal totems, Eastern and Western spiritual paths including Buddhism, Tai Chi, Celtic traditions, paganism, and various forms of meditation, Reiki. My personal favorite from working with Krista in the store, she is a poet, she is so well read, she is knowledgeable about 9 out of 10 things that come out of my mouth.
I don't know about that.
And for over 15 years, Krista's been giving professional readings. And our poet and vivid dreamer is not only highly intuitive, she's known for her deep insight, a soothing presence, and uncanny predictions. She's part of a worldwide lineage of women that are resurrecting the ancient oracle traditions. Hooray! Thanks for taking that up. She's been busy.
That is true. I do stay busy.
Yes. And now on to Michael. Definitely no less interesting. Kabbalistic Tarot Master. 15 years of professional readings, having garnered international celebrity clientele and lots of media attention. For 3 years, Michael and Krista refined their revolutionary system for interpreting tarot. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper as the interview goes on. But in addition to his tarot studies, Michael is involved in a number of Western mystical traditions, including Freemasonry. I told you, he's a really interesting guy. He's currently working on an online course for teaching their Kabbalistic Tarot method, as well as New Millennium Prophets, an organization of readers and analysts that will study global changes. Just gets more interesting. I actually didn't know that. The day-to-day conversation is usually about cars,
hockey,
guitars. Well, we don't talk hockey that much, but usually it's like cars or guitars. And studying global change, who knew? So, together, this is where it gets interesting. These two are married, and amongst that shared passion is this beautiful study of Kabbalistic Tarot.
Yes.
Which, like I mentioned earlier, they refined and developed together. So, Krista met Michael while in Nova Scotia, studying the magical Celtic tradition. That's what your bio says. I don't know why you were really there, but that's
that's true.
It makes for a great crossing of paths.
There's other reasons too.
Yes. And like I said, crossing of paths. And she met Michael, and he introduced her to the tarot. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's a little snoops, a little fact checking. She agrees. And the lifelong passion was ignited. Their study of Kabbalistic Tarot began, and their system offers a greater accuracy to prediction, a depth of philosophy, as well as a deeper understanding to life. And I've recently come to learn just a little bit more about both tarot and both Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, and just from barely scratching the surface and listening to this interesting information, I can absolutely appreciate how these systems can come together and really support each other and provide that much more insight. So I can see how that prediction becomes more accurate. And then lastly, I'll say that their work has been validated by Kabbalistic rabbis, as well as their thousands of clients over the years, all over the world. Kabbalistic Tarot has that greater accuracy compared to other means of interpretation, and Michael has even been able to predict timing down to the day or within minutes. Excuse me. No one saw that coming. So this is all really fascinating stuff, and we're going to get into the meat and potatoes now. If you're anything like me, you may not really have a full grasp of what the tarot is about, or what Kabbalah is about, or even the Tree of Life. So sit back and relax and get a feel for this information. So I'd like to ask you guys to explain a little bit of your background individually, and then how, in coming together, how and when you first realized the power of Kabbalistic Tarot. So, ladies first.
Well, I began my journey when I was quite young, when I was 17, because of a tragedy in my life, and sometimes it sets people on a journey. So my brother was lost at sea, and my whole family was really shook up by that. So I started reading Casey, and eventually met a true master in Tibetan Buddhism, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, and I took refuge as a Buddhist. And at that time, my sheer goal was to become enlightened and to write poetry. I was not the most practical 20-some-year-old person, though I did have regular jobs like everyone else. And I spent a lot of time in the Eastern tradition, and I really value a lot of what I learned with the meditation and the pujas that I did a lot of at the time. But my interest led to more of the Celtic world, and particularly the Morgan, the goddess, and then eventually I went to Nova Scotia. But before that, I never thought I'd do readings, but I'd been studying on my own numerology, astrology. I'd gone to some really good readers. I was very fortunate to have really good people that were my readers when I was younger, no one scaring me and telling me I had curses. And so I was really impressed by the system, and they really helped me make major decisions in my life. And that's what I liked about it, is that they helped me in very difficult situations sometimes. So I didn't really ever think I'd be a reader, though. And in fact, even one psychic told me that even though I'd be highly intuitive, I shouldn't be a reader. So I thought, okay, cool, you know, I won't be. But I was really fascinated with metaphysics, and I always will be. Then when I met Michael, at that point I was I had started working with the animal cards, and I learned that from my friend Lainey, who was also one of my teachers. And she had the medicine cards on her table, and I'd pick a card for the day, and I loved animals. But I found they were really amazingly helpful and accurate. So I actually started with Michael. Michael wanted to start a tarot business, and in fact, he gave me the first really decent tarot reading I'd ever had. And so I was kind of impressed by what he knew. So he decided he wanted to try out the tarot, and he'll tell you his story. But my part of it was I knew the medicine cards and the animal cards, so I would do a reading with him, and we would sit together at a table in a Nova Scotia mall, and one reading was his tarot reading, and then I would do a medicine card reading. And I'll never forget the very first reading I ever did. I thought, what am I going to talk about for 15 minutes? I can't believe I thought that, because now I can go on and on forever. But, you know, it was really a little intimidating. But it was really nice. People really liked the two together. And then after about a month, I really did like the tarot, but I didn't know how to really work with it at all. And I did have the astrology background, numerology, and I was, you know, intuitive. So we found that the tarot was more popular, and I was starting to really fall in love with it. So Michael taught me everything he knew in a month. I don't recommend this to people, but I was reading professionally very quickly. But, you know, we did a lot of readings, and I had him there, you know, to talk about. And at that time, we did reversals. We used some traditional interpretations of the cards. We didn't really come across Kabbalah until we came to Los Angeles, and actually went to a lecture by Roseanne Barr just on Kabbalah. And we got interested in the mystical Kabbalah, which is a little different from the Jewish Kabbalah that Eliphas Levi kind of made popular in the 1800s. And what it is it takes the tarot cards and it lays it out on the tree of life in a certain pattern. So you have an organized system where certain cards connect, the Empress connects to the 2s and 3s. So my husband and I, we basically memorized that whole tree, and we literally talked about it, worked with it at least for 2 years. And it was to the point, it was crazy how much we worked with it. You know, I would have dreams about it. I'd wake up and I wouldn't even have a coffee, and he'd say, what do you think about the High Priestess? And I'd be like, what about high coffee? But we fell in love with the two together, even though they were never made to be together. But you may not know this, the tarot was also never made to be a predictive tool. It was a card game, like the trumps, like an early trump game. So it's never been proven that there's an esoteric origins to the tarot. It's just that people took it over. And again, it works, you know, so there's nothing invalid about that. Same with Kabbalah. You don't have to put the two together, but once we did, our readings just became so different. And we did need to do reversals, which were very confusing because people had different ideas of what a reverse card is. We personally didn't like the idea of the reversals because we thought if it's an imagistic kind of system, why would you, you know, reverse the image? But my background kind of switched more to the Western studies once I got involved in tarot and Kabbalah, just out of natural, you know, curiosity. And I've gone a little bit back to more of the Buddhist stuff, and I've been doing more mantra practice, and I kind of go back and forth between the two, and have sort of made my own spiritual path at this point. So it's a little bit about my background. I also started doing Tai Chi when I came out here at the Bodhi Tree Bookstore. There's a wonderful man, Tim O'Connor, and he offered the employees like 50% discount on a class that's already inexpensive. And he's a master in his tradition, has only studied with one woman, Mary Chow, who's a lineage holder. And she was kind of cool too, as well, because she's one of the first women to learn all the weapons in her school. So he's a wonderful teacher, and I've been working off and on with him since the time I worked at the Bodhi Tree. So that's, you know, almost been 15 years. And I'm not a dedicated student by any means, but he's really helped me a lot. And I like that sort of Eastern side of things to Tai Chi as well. And that just keeps me kind of sane, I think, as a reader. So
I learned earlier from, again, the scratching of the surface of Kabbalah and the Tree of Life that there is, you know, a lot of it is about that balance, right? If I understood that correctly. And so it seems like you've come to a place where you really get to dance with that balance of your studies, which is really cool because it makes whoever is sitting with you feel like the experience is, it's more holistic. It feels, you know, all around, well-rounded, as opposed to just coming from one very narrow vantage point, which could be, you know, a turnoff for some people, but it really does feel like this balanced interpretation. And something else that I picked up when you were speaking earlier is that in the tarot and in Kabbalah, it seems that there's so much that can be discovered.
It's true. It's endless.
If it started as a game and then this something else, something wonderful was discovered within it, and then same thing with taking the Tree of Life and using it with the tarot. You both have discovered something extra special there again. So that's going to be amazing to see what happens, you know, 50 years from now, what happens with your work.
Sure, for sure.
So tell us about you and
well,
growing up in Nova Scotia.
Growing up in Nova Scotia, yes. And while Krista was studying all these high spiritual pursuits, my childhood was beer and rock and roll, pretty much. So I don't feel worthy, but you know, I think I came to it through, I guess, what a Kabbalist would think of as a pretty traditional Kabbalistic route, in that I didn't study a whole lot of stuff in my childhood the way Krista did. And I had really no interest in any of this until about my mid-30s. And in Kabbalah, in the day, they wouldn't actually teach somebody until they were 35, because they felt that you needed the maturity, you needed a certain life experience to really be able to relate and understand what they were teaching you. So that the rule was that no students younger than 35. And there's a belief that at 35 you sort of come into this natural spiritual awakening that happens for most people, where they start to say, you know, there must be more to life than this, and they start to ask the deeper questions. And for me, that was true too. So when I was young, I mean, my resume is a mess. I've done everything. I was in the Navy, I worked in the police department as a patrolman, a morgue, salesperson, corporate stuff, you name it, I've done it. And I felt pretty lost probably, but the nice part now is it kind of gave me a very well-rounded experience of life. So now whoever I'm working with, I can relate to them a little bit, because I probably stood in their shoes at one time or another, or something similar to it. So even though I didn't know I was formally being educated for what I was going to do later, I was probably being much more educated than I realized at the time too. But in my mid-30s, I started to ask those deeper questions. I had a friend who owned a metaphysical bookstore in Nova Scotia, Little Mysteries, and she said, the way your brain works, I think that you would really get a kick out of tarot. And I thought, okay, so I'll pick up a deck, and I started studying it, and just became fascinated with it. And then here, almost 20 years later, we're still working with it and being fascinated with it still. And I think it's the first thing for sure that I can say that after 20 years that I'm still in love with. I still find it intriguing and fascinating, and still wonder at times how the whole process came into being and how it works. And I think it's just an incredible source of knowledge in many respects. And I think of all the different tools that we use for, I would call it fortune telling for lack of a better word. I think the two that are the most profound, and Crowley agreed, was the tarot and the I Ching. And I think they're the only two different tools that have within them an entire philosophy. And really, the Kabbalah is that, Judaic mystical philosophy of life and how it works. And so when you're studying tarot, if you're studying it properly, you become very conversant in that kind of philosophy of life. And then with I Ching, when you're studying that, you're studying Taoism, so you become very conversant in Taoist philosophy. And they're the only two tools that really have that depth. And I think that that's why I find it still fascinating to study, because it's life, and it's just fascinating to study life and the mechanics of it and how it all works. But and so that's kind of basically where I came from with it. And I think that the cool thing was, we met Krista, and as I said, we were working on this for about 3 years, piecing it all together. The best book on tarot is still the one by Crowley, and I always tell people the good news it's by Crowley, the bad news it's by Crowley, So he talks a lot in riddles and metaphor, and it took us 2 years to figure out what the heck he was trying to say. But once you get it, it's brilliant. And it kind of ruins you for every other book. It's like going from university back to kindergarten, and to read other stuff. But and we worked on it about 3 years and relating it to the Tree of Life and understanding what it was about. And then we were in Beverly Hills doing a party for someone, and the last person I read for that night was a Kabbalistic rabbi. I was using Crowley's deck that have the Hebrew letters printed on the major cards, and he noticed them. He said, wow, those are the letters. And I said, well, yeah, it's the Tree of Life. There's 22 major cards. They each relate to one of the pathways. And he said, well, lay it out for me. So I took the major cards and he created the Tree of Life. And he said, now explain it to me. And I thought, this should be very good. I'm going to explain Kabbalah to a rabbi, right? And I've never studied Kabbalah classically. I've never taken a workshop or anything on it, just studied it through the tarot. So I explained to him our take on it and what we've been working on for 3 years. And he listened very intently. And afterwards, he kind of laughed. And he said, well, let's just say you have your own way of putting things. He said, we would use different terms. But he said, everything you're saying, your principles are fundamentally really sound. He said, it's what it is. He said, it's just you're expressing it in a slightly different language, but it is exactly what it means. And so I thought that was really validating, that we hadn't wasted 3 years for our life.
Absolutely.
And then in the old ways of teaching things, the theory of Kabbalah is that it's a universal truth. And that anyone can sit there and meditate on the symbols long enough and you'll eventually understand what it means. And it's a very slow way of learning, but it's also a very profound and deep way of learning something. And nowadays we live in a society where everybody wants to pop something into a microwave and take one weekend workshop and I'm a master or something. And I've met shamans that are 21 years old, and I don't get that, because in Native Americans' traditions, it was a 50-year course. How do you do it at 21? So no disrespect to being 21, but these are very deep studies. It's a lifetime study, really, in many respects. And I know shamans in the Native American tradition that are in their 70s that still won't use the term because they don't feel they're worthy yet, of embracing that term. So for me, it's a very good way of learning something. You develop insights that are very deep and very profound. And the other thing that's really cool about it is that you're not limited in your understanding. And a lot of the books on tarot will say, okay, this card means this, this, or this. And it's a very restrictive set of words to describe something. Whereas I think if you're learning it properly in the way we try to teach it with Kabbalah, you're kind of getting more of an essence of what that card means energetically. And that frees you to have more flexibility with how you're going to interpret it. And yet still staying within that energy being what it is. But you can just describe it in as many thousands of different nuances. And that's something I think a lot of the way people read tarot, it's very lacking in. Because I think this always means that, and that's it.
When I hear you speaking about how you have fallen in love with tarot and your take on Kabbalah, it almost conjures up this image of a box that you can reach into time after time, and it's always going to be something from the depth and something different, and it seems like an infinite learning toolkit. I'm understanding that by providing the essence and by using something that is basically explaining the relationships in the universe and how the universe works, and then the system of the tarot, and what seems like more of freedom of interpretation.
Oh, absolutely. The thing that's neat about our system even, and also Deanne Fortune talks about it in her Kabbalah book, is you make it your own. And it's a combination of understanding the Kabbalah itself and what you bring to the table, to Michael said, his experiences. So for me, as I allow myself more experiences in life, and I look at different cultures and I read different things, I add that to my well that I draw on when I go to make a reading. And it's a very dynamic system. And so as I grow as a person, my readings will grow in depth. And so it's a combination of both that. And that's what I like about the Kabbalah is it is so, we see it like a skeleton, and then people flesh out what they're going to do with that skeleton. And also people have different interests. So you could, for instance, have more of a medical interest. And there are medical attributes associated with the Tree of Life. There are different correlations you can learn. There are plant correlations, there are animal correlations, there's even drug correlations, which I tried on once. I did it as a kind of an experiment. Somebody was recovering from addiction, and the two, according to Crowley, is associated with cocaine. So I actually asked her if it was cocaine, and it was. And it was not psychic at all. It was correspondences. And you can sound so psychic with the Kabbalah, and you're not necessarily, because I've had people say, you're more accurate than a psychic. I'm just really reading the Kabbalah. I'm just reading the pathways. And so that's what really impressed me about it, is the correspondences, the idea of synchronicity. And that the other thing that Michael and I love is that it teaches you to see things in gray and in patterns. So the universe thrives in patterns.
Absolutely.
So no book on tarot can teach you how to read the cards together. Kabbalah teaches you to think about them as a whole. So after a while, even if you have a favorite card or a card you hate, you don't anymore, because you can see its value in a certain context. And so all the cards are neither good nor bad. And also it's the pattern that counts. You know, you could have two very difficult cards and a lot of really amazingly good cards, and it's going to be an overall a good pattern. So I've learned to see things much more in nuances because of Kabbalah and tarot, even in my own life, not so black and white, because it really isn't. So that's that idea that Kabbalah and tarot together, they teach you how to live your life more truthfully and also more in a deep way, I find, for myself.
Right, and then I think also any energy can be used or misused, if you will. And so even sometimes the things that we naturally perceive as maybe the harsher energies, if people actually embrace them and work with them, they turn into something positive. You know, there's a way to transmute all that energy into something positive. And I think Kabbalah sort of teaches that. And then just very practically, I think that when you study the Kabbalah and the interpretation, I think it brings a depth to the individual cards that is lacking in many of the other interpretations. And my favorite is the Nine of Swords, and it's one of the first things when I see a book on tarot, I flip it and see if the person has a blessed clue what they're talking about. And most don't. And in fact, I remember opening one book, and the person said, there must be something good about this card, but if there is, I can't find it. And I thought, well, that's kind of sad, because it's one of the best cards in the deck. What do you mean?
Yeah.
And all the Nine of Swords means, nine, this is how Kabbalah would interpret it. The 9 is a number of manifestations. So we know it's not just an idea or concept. It's something real, something happening. Swords also means the idea of something is happening, or it's an experience, something to do, you know, it's something occurring. And then the 9 is also on the center pillar. And the center pillar in Kabbalah means that which serves the higher good or the greater good. So really, when you interpret that together, all the 9 means is to do that which is in accordance with the greater good, or to do that which is necessary. Now, the reason Crowley, this is why you've got to love him and hate him at the same time, the reason he calls it cruelty is not to mean that you're going to be suffering or that it's cruel, but that you can't look at that sympathetically through emotion. To do the right thing is just to do the right thing. And whether it makes you happy or not is not relevant. It's about doing what's best. And so it's a higher thing than emotion. So
and again, you can see how people aren't seeing that in the larger pattern.
Because they sort of see that lack of emotion in there, which is true, it does, but it does for a good reason. It's because, again, we don't want your sympathies to play into the idea of doing the right thing. We want to look at that
kind of what's necessary in the pattern, what's necessary to play out.
What's best for everyone in the moment, which may be something you like and maybe something you don't like, but it's what's best.
And that's interesting that you're saying that aspect of it comes from the Kabbalah, because a lot of people, I think, do lose sight of that as a reason for why, if there is a hardship or a tragedy in their life, a lot of people can lose sight of, well, this is something that could be, for the greatest good that may not be right in front of your face or easy to understand or even, comfortable to accept.
Right.
But,
and the idea of the center pillar, it's that point where we sort of either maximize good or minimize harm. So if something happens which is for the greater good, then anything else, even if we're going through something painful or difficult, anything else would actually possibly be worse rather than better. And it's hard for people to imagine going through a tough experience, but if they made different decisions, maybe it would have actually been worse rather than better, and so it's the minimum kind of thing, or that something so beneficial comes out of the painful experience later on to make it all worth doing, or all worthwhile. So some greater good is achieved by going through this experience. And then it's also the idea that when you're doing something fun and positive, that it's also meaningful and it's also significant. So it's kind of supposed to sober up those giddy energies a little bit and bring a little comfort to the distraught energies by creating that balance again of understanding that this is pleasurable or painful, but that's not relevant. It's something that ultimately will serve the greater good. And that's the comfort in it. That's where you find the comfort in it, is with that knowledge that this is something that needs to happen.
And I imagine that information like this could be incredibly soothing for people who, on one end, may not be at peace with accepting and receiving, and on the other hand, possibly could be stuck in a place of potential victimhood, not understanding the greater significance of their experience.
And as we mentioned earlier, as I said, a reading, there's no such thing as a bad reading, just bad readers. Is my favorite statement. And really, a reading should do one of two things. It should give you good news. So if you're doing the right thing, if you're doing positive things, it should encourage you. It should tell you about the good things that are going to happen in your life. You keep it up and you're doing really well. Or it should give you good advice. Here's how I need to handle life. This is what I'm supposed to be learning. This is how to turn things around, or to get things moving in a positive direction. If I can understand what's going on better, I can start to do things more creatively and start to move into a happier energy. So, as I said, good news or good advice, that's what the reading, sometimes a little both, but that's what the reading should do.
That's a win-win. That's what we call a win-win.
And while still being truthful with people, you don't want to hide from the truth. If something is good, it's good. If it's not, it's not. But it's still about how do we work with these things? How do we move it forward? How do we get to that better life, that better place?
Absolutely. Stagnation could be just the most frustrating and depressing, and if you don't know what to do, a little leverage to get unstuck, it comes in the form of insight and understanding oftentimes. So we understand how there's good news, there's good advice, it's good information, period. Who would you say, in your experience, that this kind of reading, Kabbalistic Tarot, that this kind of reading has really made the strongest impact? Or, is it just, it works for everyone across the board, or do you feel like
it definitely
there's some
works,
turnkey experiences with certain kinds of people?
The only people that don't like it, and we know as soon as they sit down, is people that come looking for spectacle, and they want you to guess grandma's name, and they want the old-fashioned kind of misunderstanding of what a psychic reading is, the gypsy thing. And those people we know right away we won't even read for. But everyone else, even people that maybe don't know what we do, once we sit down, they find it, I think, very grounding. We're always told we're very grounded, practical, soothing, but also accurate. I've had many people come back and tell me I am very accurate with timing, or I once got something 4 years ahead to the month, and I had a regular client tell me, and now I would never remember that. And I count on them telling me, and honestly, I know I got that through the Kabbalah. I have some little psychic stuff with numbers, but I really use the system of Kabbalah to time things. And it's a system that involves some intuition, but some of it's kind of logical when we teach people. So there have been timing things I've done, and I know predictive-wise, I wouldn't have been that accurate without Kabbalah. And my favorite was Michael used to work on the beach. And the weather reporters here are really bad. And when you're working on the beach, in the winter, you really need to know if rain's coming. And so he was getting so frustrated. We have the Robin Wood deck is particularly good because of the way it's designed. It has a lot of sort of elemental cards, so you can see it looks stormy or not. Anyway, he got, using the system with that card, he got down to the point where he knew a storm would be coming. He'd pack up and leave, and everybody else would be there, and the weatherman hadn't said anything about it, or it being windy. And so he got, it was because he needed to, but also I think because it was sort of a new challenge, that he got very good at predicting the timing of weather accurately on the beach. And again, we did not make this up. We have just brought it to a practical use with the tarot. So I don't want it to seem very esoteric, because we do everything that a reader would normally do. We look at life. Most people want to know about love, about work, about relationships. Did they do the right thing? Illness, choices where they're going to live. And then some people just want to know if they're on the right path in their life. You can also look at, let's say you have a goal, but you don't know how to get there. You can do that with the Kabbalah. It's very helpful. You can look at your own personality and see how balanced you are emotionally, intellectually, and sort of work on things. So it's just really versatile. So even though it sounds like an esoteric system, and it is used that way, rightfully so by some people, we don't use it that way. We use it in a very grounded, philosophical way, and it works. So I personally have found, I have read from young people to old people to other readers to people that can't speak English, have translators there. So across the board, I've read for rich people, homeless people, struggling people, mothers, everyone, and they've all shown at least enjoyment in the process. And then what they do with it is certainly up to them, which is very important, is how you use the reading.
Yeah, and Krista brings up a good point, that other people that I don't particularly do well with are people that think everything is fated and set in stone, because I don't believe that. I think that we have free will. I think when we work with the future, we're working with a future made up of probabilities and tendencies and things like that, but we still have the room to do something with it. And there are people you'll do a reading for, and you'll talk about something, and then they'll go do the exact opposite of everything that you've discussed in the reading. So, they want to save a relationship. So you'll say, okay, well, give the guy some space. He needs a little space to sort some things out. So just leave him be for a little bit, and just have a little faith, but don't push things. And then, of course, on the way home, they call him 30 times between there and now they don't understand why the guy isn't as happy as we thought he was. He's all upset.
Right.
Duh. What part of giving some space did you not understand? So again, that's free will, but the idea is that if you understand the nature of things and you work with it a little bit better, you have a much better chance of getting a good outcome or a good result. And that's what we try and do, is give people a better understanding of the nature of what they're working with, and then it's up to them what they want to do with it, how they want to handle it. But ultimately, I believe in free will, and as I said, the only way that you can have a completely predictable future is to not have free will. Everything has to be set in stone, which means you have no control over everything that's about to happen to you from here on forward.
Right.
I don't believe that. I think you can change your life. I think if a person stops making bad choices and starts making good ones, their relationships will suddenly get a lot better. You know what I mean? And again, people can choose to get off drugs and get sober and change their whole reality, and that's a choice. It's something, and it doesn't mean it's not a bit of work or a bit of struggle, but it's still a choice at the end of the day. And I believe in giving people empowerment and choice, but that's their responsibility, as I tell people. It's not us. We're just going to let you know what you're working with, and it's up to you to do something with it.
Right. So again, folks can come and get this insight, this understanding, and it really does feel like, with the help of sitting with Krista or Michael, what you're able to see goes from this to much bigger, and you get to have the information from the tarot as well as these pathways and the patterns from the Kabbalah, and you are informed, and ultimately the choice is yours. You have the information about your options, whether it's where you want to move or which job offer to take or some life advice, or you can come and get that deeper understanding of essentially your purpose here, or your lesson,
or your experience,
or your experience,
what you're
and
experiencing,
why. Yeah, it's can provide so much more peace once you make your choice. So thank you for all of that. Let's get some information about what happens if someone is interested in this. Maybe you've had plenty of readings before, but never Kabbalistic Tarot. Maybe you've never experienced Tarot or Kabbalah. If they come to Mystic Journey Bookstore or find you at, is it mysticraven.net? Mysticraven.net, another way to find them. What can we expect? Do I need to know, what time I was born?
No.
Just need to show up.
No. I think if they've never had any kind of a reading, I usually tell them where I'm coming from philosophically, so they know my intention. Like, I tell them what I think a prediction is, like Michael did. I see it as a probability. I tell them what I normally don't talk about. I don't usually predict accidents or death. There are some exceptions to everything, particularly with death, but I've learned that it's a subject we tiptoe around, unfortunately, because on some level maybe we should be able to talk about death more freely, especially if you have like an ill grandparent. That's when I'll look and see if they're likely to die, so they can be there. But so there's some things I tell them I don't do right away in case they're looking for it. And then they can either say nothing. I'll say, look, do you have a burning question or not? And the only reason I ask that is because I use different layouts according to questions. But I can do cold readings without anyone ever saying anything ever. And in fact, I have done that where they never even said what it was about, but they said it was accurate and just thanked me and left.
Yeah, I had a cool experience with that.
That's bizarre when that happens.
That's cool.
You don't really know exactly what they're relating
client.
to.
I like that.
I had a guy came in one day who was a therapist, and he sat down and he said, I want to do a reading on 2 different things, but I'm not going to tell you anything. And I said, okay, fine. So he chose the first pattern. And I discussed it as much as I could, you know, the elements associated with it. And he sat there, and he never said a word. He never smiled, never frowned, just a poker face. And after I was exhausted, he said, okay, let's look at the second thing. So we shuffled the cards, and he did that. And he sat there again, not saying a word, doing anything. And then finally, after the reading, I said to him, you know, did that answer your question? Because we don't like to charge people if it didn't satisfy them, if it didn't work out. And he said, well, he said, I understand feedback's important. He said, let's just say you're pretty good at what you do. You get up and left. To this day, I still don't know what we talked about for an hour. You know, I had no frame of reference. You know, I didn't know what it was about. And so for me, it was just gibberish because I was giving an answer without knowing the question, so to speak. And so I had no way to interpret it. But in his mind, since he understood what it was that we were doing the reading on, everything made perfect sense to him.
Right. That's
so you can actually do that without asking a single question. You can do the entire reading. But a lot of readers don't like to do that, and I think sometimes it's just because they're a little insecure. I'll ask questions occasionally if I feel it will be helpful in not misinterpreting something. So for example, if we're looking at a relationship and you've been dating somebody for a week versus 10 years, expectations are a little different. So if someone's not sure they want to marry you and you only got together last Thursday, that's normal. But it's been 10 years and they're not sure, that's a problem. So you know, so I just want to be a little extra careful not to misinterpret something and things like that. But you can actually do readings, as Krista said, without any knowledge, without any idea of what you're reading about, and still have it totally relate to the person, which I think is really cool.
Are there any misconceptions that folks may have when they read Kabbalistic Tarot? What do you think have you encountered any?
I have a pet peeve with the tarot part. When I first started reading, people would come and say, do you just read the cards in this kind of like put down way? And I was really offended for the tarot. It is an amazing tool, no different from astrology, and if you were to simply read the cards, all you would do is go 9 of Swords, 10 of Swords. Even if you were to look at it symbolically, which is another way to do it, which even traditional tarot books don't do, it's a dynamic system, profound, it has a lineage going back to the 1400s. Some amazing people were involved with creating it if you look at its history, and it's beautiful. And I used to want to defend the tarot, like, how dare you talk about the tarot that way? And then I realized they just didn't know. So now I take it as, I ask them, well, what do you know about the tarot? And then I tell them, and then they just didn't know that you can use the cards as a tool. So it is one of my things where I don't think even a lot of tarot readers use it in an ongoing way, whereas we do because we have the Kabbalah. I'm expecting to learn so much more, and as a moon in Gemini, I get so bored. I'm not bored after all these years because there's so much more in there that I can study.
It's such a huge body of knowledge, and people like that, I said to Krista, it's like asking your doctor, so is all you do brain surgery? It's enough.
It's enough. Like, you know, it's like, oh, you're only a tarot reader. And the other misconception I would like to talk about is psychic. Now, when I went for readings, my very first reading ever was to a regular, amazing astrologer. Now, I do think he has some abilities intuitively, the way he draws from the chart, but I know he's not a psychic. To this day, he's one of the best readers I've ever been to because he had a lot of knowledge. He knew how to deliver a reading, and he really cared about you. So I think this idea that being psychic in itself will produce a good reading is just so ridiculous. It's because I've gone to readers. Another reader who happened to also be an astrologer was a relocation astrologer. He says, now I want you to know I'm not psychic at all. He premised it. And then he gave me the most interesting, accurate view of where I was living based on astrology that he studied, only location astrology. So I remember thinking, wow, that's really good though. How did he get that? What was his tool? Now, I think there are abilities we all have. Like, you know, I know from palmistry, a palm reader once did Michael's palm, and genetically he has a predisposition to being precognitive. And he is a little bit precognitive naturally. And so I have some natural clairvoyance, but I see that as just a very tiny part of doing a reading, because you not only have to look at the reading, but how you work with that person and the words that you choose to tell your reading with, because that makes a big difference to people. How you talk to people, what you talk about, how you listen. And you could actually be a very psychic person and give a lousy reading. And my other thing I'd like to clear up is prediction itself, and I've studied this, is a very separate form of ability than clairvoyance, clairaudience. It is its own thing, and it requires more than psychicism, because you have to be able to combine through analysis all these variables, and you come up with your best thought about, okay, I've analyzed everything through all these different means, and I'm going to predict this. And so it's a different skill. And this is from my going to other readers and studying it before I became a predictor. And so you can't really compare people that do a lot of predictive work to sheer psychicism, because they're different.
Got it.
Yeah,
Very different.
To predict, actually, it's more of an analytical skill than it is a psychic skill. And the way I like to tell people is, imagine that we're talking about the weather. And I said to you, what was the weather a year ago on this day? Well, you can call the weather office, and they have all kinds of facts and figures, temperature and humidity and so forth. If I said, what's the weather like today? You can just look at the sky and tell me it's sunny, I'm sitting here, it's not cold, it's a little breezy, and you can describe the weather well. But if I said to you, what's the weather going to be like a year from today? We're asking you to predict. Now, who are you going to call, to find that information? Well, if you're smart, you'll call the weather office again. You'll say, please send me over all the data you have on this date, going back as far as you do, and then you'll put that all together, you'll analyze it, you'll decide, well, it tends to be sunny, it tends to be within a certain temperature range. I've noticed a little tendency over the last 5 years that it's been getting about a degree warmer. So next year I'm going to predict it's going to be sunny, it's going to be a little breezy, it's going to be a certain temperature. But you're actually making a logical prediction based on the information that you've pulled together and extrapolated from that to make it a good educated guess. And that's what prediction is, really, is a very good educated guess. But it requires a lot of analytical ability to really predict well. And a lot of readers don't really develop that part of themselves. In fact, they put it down. We don't want to use that part of your brain. In fact, to make a prediction, it's essential, that part of your brain. And with the psychic stuff, it can gather information, but it's actually the rational mind that has to then put it all together, find the patterns, extrapolate from that, and make a prediction. So it's
that does sound like a very specific skill set that actually would require a good amount of time and experience to refine.
Well, yeah, I think
you definitely get better with
doing
it. Yeah.
I mean, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a great mystic, and speaking as his character Holmes, had, I think, the best definition of intuition I've ever read. And he said, intuition is your accumulated life wisdom distilled in an instant. So yes, at the beginning our brains hurt. We would study these things deeply and have to debate it all. Now, after 20 years, we're probably looking at the patterns and doing it in a heartbeat, because we've seen the patterns so many times that we can just immediately recognize it and extrapolate without going through all the steps involved in figuring things out.
The intuition is informed by
the past experience.
Right. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for explaining what happens when we sit down for a Kabbalistic Tarot reading and what doesn't happen. Just as important.
It doesn't happen. It is.
So let's see. I'm trying to think. Is there something... We understand that it's really about taking this information to make the best choice possible moving forward. Because my question was going to be, how do we make the most out of this session? How do we make the most out of the information presented? And it's really just something you actually said earlier too, was just also being honest in the reading and being honest with yourself.
Sure, being open to the truth, and then listening to the advice that's coming through the reading, and then applying that to your life. And again, a lot of people fall down on the application part, that they want the truth, they listen to it. And as I said, then they go do the exact opposite of everything you've discussed. And you have to apply it. And I've seen people, with a Native American guy when we first were in Halifax.
Oh, he was amazing.
Was amazing. And he would get readings from Krista, he loved her. And the next day he would get another reading. We were working at a festival, so we saw him every day. And he had changed his whole life in 24 hours based on the reading. He would take whatever was in that reading.
It was unusual.
He would immediately apply it to his life, and then he would come back and tell her how things were changing. And But he was big on, and that was his whole path as a shaman, was the idea of applying the knowledge, and he would really do a good job of the application of it, and he found it really useful. But his life would change in 24 hours.
And you can tell because when people come a lot, the same cards seem to come up, and they're going to say, well, you told me that last week. His cards were so different that I would say, I finally asked him, what are you doing? I said, how do you do this? And he said, well, I just took the advice of the cards. And I have a similar story, except it was about myself. I was reading for this really neat businessman in New York, and I never let people read for me, but at the end he goes, I'd play around with the cards and I'd like to do a little reading for you, just to thank you. And I thought, for some reason, a little voice said, let him do a reading. And he just picked 3 cards, and he said to me, he looked at it, and he said, you have all your tools, now use them. Now, that resonated with me for so long. I cannot tell you, it was exactly what I needed to know. And then I implemented. I said, he's right. I don't need to learn anything new. I need to be using more of what I already know. I've been studying and studying. And it was a simple, quick 3-card reading. But I applied it. And it really just resonated with me, the information and advice. And so in a way, it was better than psychic for me. And I'll never forget it because it was just so ordinary and so quick. And like I said, I would normally never do that. It just seems like a boundary thing. And it's like, I don't know what makes some people decide to even take one piece of advice, because you don't have to take all of the advice. You take what resonates with you, and if you try it on, you'll see it actually does work. I mean, that's what's cool about the oracle system. An oracle system really will work if you use it, because I have taken advice from my own cards, from other readers, and I have literally changed my life. I would never be in this if it didn't work for me and did not continue to work. But I can't make someone take any advice. I can certainly encourage them, I can coach them, but that is a free will thing, and at some point a person's ready to do it, and sometimes people seem never to be ready, You
talk about applying. There's an example here at the Bodhi Tree, this guy that I read for, and it sounds like I'm bragging, so please don't take it that way. It's the tool, isn't me. But it's just the idea of how he applied the reading, and he had a business, and it was struggling in a plumbing business, and the reading basically said, look, accept it, don't fight it, do what you got to do, but you've got to make the hard choices now. You're going to have to let some things go, and you're going to have to accept the reality of what you're dealing with, the losses. And so he said, based on the reading, he decided, you're right. So he said, I closed my business, I moved back into my garage, I started small again, I went right back to square one. He said, it was the best thing I could have done. He said, I was able to rebuild everything. He said, last year I did $3 million in business. I now employ 28 people, and those people have jobs because of that reading. He said, if I'd have kept fighting and fighting and fighting, but doing the right thing, he said, by accepting and just giving in and going through it, it got me to where I needed to be. And he says, and now he says, I'm doing charity work. I've got millions of dollars to build homeless shelters and stuff. But it was all coming from that one reading. And it was just telling him, look, don't fight this. Accept where you're at and do what you have to do. And he applied it. And I'm not taking credit, because he did the work. He wanted the truth. He listened to the truth. He implemented what was in the reading. And it changed his whole life.
And so I think on that note, if you're watching this because you're interested in tarot or Kabbalah or Kabbalistic Tarot, or you feel called to reach out and get some help in getting some insider information, what I'm hearing from both your example with you have the tools, use them, and this gentleman whose message was to accept it, it's that you're being called or drawn for a reason, and it's possibly to help yourself. And if you can show up and be honest and be open to receive the information and then act upon it, which takes a tremendous amount of courage if it's something you maybe are resistant to hearing or weren't prepared to hear, but you are the person that's going to bring yourself to this reading. That says a lot. And it does. And you're here to help yourself. And the tools will be here. And these wonderful people will be here to help. And you can take that information and make the right choices, and then come back and let us know how it all went and how the timing worked out. And we'll have some more great testimonials. I have one last question I'm going to ask of both Krista and Michael, and that is if they would like to share with us, with you, what is your intention with your work at this point on your spiritual path? What are you looking to offer? Where are you now?
I think for me, my intention is to help people to really fulfill their best dreams in life, and to really find them if they don't have a sense of them, to stay on the path, and to use all of my tools, palmistry, tarot, and animal cards, to encourage people to have a meaningful life and to make it their own wonderful life. And I do believe in people following their passions and dreams, because I have, and so I want to do that for other people.
See, now we're coming full circle, all the way back, which is good.
Beer and rock and roll?
Because Krista has all these wonderful high ideas. With me, I have no friggin' clue. I just, I know I want to do good, and I know that whatever it is, it's going to be fine, and it's going to be wonderful, but I haven't really sat down and thought about, where I want to take things or what I want to do with it. And I've always been sort of the one that just lets myself be guided somewhat in life, and wherever it is, it's just fine with me. I always tell people if I wasn't here, I'd just be somewhere else. And it's all fine. So for me, whatever it needs to be, it will be, and however it needs to unfold, it will unfold. And I know I love this, and I'm always going to love it, and there's always going to be a part of my life that will be devoted to doing something with it. But, what form my life will take, I have no clue, and whatever it is, it'll be just fine. So.
Such contentment, such fulfillment. I love it. I love it. And thank you both for the reading. It was fascinating. There was an element of the past and the present and the future, and lessons and strengths, and there was good news and there was good advice. And I wish that for you. So if you'd like to book a reading with Krista, with Michael, Kabbalistic Tarot, Animal Totem, Palmistry, just come pick their brains. They're fascinating. They're here at Mystic Journey Bookstore in Venice on Abbot Kinney. And we'll see you again with another episode of the Mystic You.